Hi, Carl. It's a crazy situation right now, and American companies and government agencies should really pay attention to this flare-up that we're seeing on the dark web at this hour because of the risk of increased hacking activity. It all started now earlier this week when the U.S. government reportedly launched a coordinated attempt to bring down the servers of that ransomware group REvil, which was behind that large beef hack that we saw earlier this year. But today, the Conti hacking group, which is believed to operate out of Russia, has issued an epic screed against the U.S. government in response to that. The hackers essentially are complaining that it's unfair and illegal to hack them. In their post, the group says, first, an attack against some servers, which the U.S. security attributes to REvil, is another reminder of what we all know, the unilateral, extraterritorial, and bandit-mugging behavior of the United States in world affairs. Now, they also complain that the people who launched the campaign against REvil are, quote, vampires drunken and intoxicated by impunity and blood. And another ransomware gang, or whoever's operating their blog right now, called Groove, is calling for all hackers to unite and fight the United States. Their post urges fellow hackers to stop competing and unite to destroy the state sector of the USA to show who's the boss on the internet. Carl, so an emerging situation here, a lot of murkiness, and you always have to take all these things with a bit of a grain of salt, given that these are hackers, they're known criminals and known liars, but it seems like there could be some action over the weekend. So if you run a server, you might want to take an eye and keep an eye on it and make sure that you're safe over the weekend. Carl?
Eamon, your beat continues to be strange and chilling. That's our Eamon Javers. Appreciate that.
It is.
Steve, all right, so assuming we could potentially be looking at new episodes of at least attempted hacking, how does this play into names we can trade?
Yeah, so to break it down, let's start off with this. If it's going to be government hacks, Palantir, the lion's share of Palantir's revenues come from government contracts. This is a stock that actually has moved sideways and really hasn't broken out. But I would think that they have first mover on a lot of these government initiatives. Having said that, CrowdStrike is a crowd favorite. It's up about 33% year to date. 23% of that is in the last 2 weeks. So this one is definitely in everyone's purview. But Carl, when you look at these names, the name that sticks out the most is Palo Alto. And this one is based on, by multiples in revenues, it exceeds its competition. It's a huge subscription-based business. Normalized earnings, subscriptions are over $3 billion. So we went from years ago with all these attacks never moving the needle to now they're actually moving the needle in some of these stocks. So those are the three names that I would play.
Yeah, Jeff, I was going to say the correlation between stories in the news and the share price, it's gotten more positive over time, right?
Yeah, and I guess it probably should. I just love how the hackers don't want to be hacked. That made me laugh. But just to put some numbers to the industry as a whole, because these stocks aren't cheap, right? But we're seeing more and more. This is the single biggest threat to the country, to corporate America. We have all of these high-profile breaches. Ransomware has cost companies something like $20 billion in 2020. And it's not just the big companies. I think you have 70% of cyber attacks now on small and mid-sized businesses, and you still only have about 10% of companies' IT spend on cybersecurity. So there is runway for these names, even though they are expensive. And I have a lot of the same names on my list. You have a CrowdStrike. They have great recurring revenues. They have improving cash flow metrics. So those are things you want to see for a stock that is priced to perfection, more or less, at this point. Palantir, I agree. At its core, cyber risk is a data issue. So to be able to look at your network in real time, that's something that Palantir gives their customers the ability to do. Steve mentioned Palo Alto. I think a company with a similar valuation, FireEye, I guess not FireEye anymore, Mandiant, they just completed the recent divestiture of some of their non-core businesses. Really, that focus on SaaS, that focus on consulting, I think it makes that business a little bit more attractive. So not cheap across the board, but at the same time, I think you do have runway if you can be patient enough.
Yeah, Mike, how do you look at the space in terms of the runway, the white space that they have? Are you looking for firms that are tailored to large enterprise where they're high value targets, or more of the small and medium sized businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, both the guys brought up some interesting things. I mean, CrowdStrike, I mean, for what it's worth, we're going to see probably something along the lines on 40% year-on-year revenue growth there. So, you know, one of the reasons that you see these what would otherwise seem like lofty valuations, obviously it's an in-demand space, and they're demonstrating that they're attached to it. But, you know, the other important point I think that Jeff made is the exposure of the small to mid-sized businesses. So, is that a solution that's going to benefit, obviously, the cybersecurity companies, like some of the aforementioned? I think it will. But it could also potentially just continue to bolster, obviously, one of the fastest growing business sectors as it stands, which is cloud. Because if you run a smaller mid-sized business and you see this as a potential threat, you can either try to face that threat yourself, or you can try to enlist some service providers to help you out and maybe offload some of the responsibility of running those servers and things yourself. And that obviously would support the big cloud providers. And now we're talking about AWS, which would obviously be feeding into Amazon and Microsoft. So I see this as basically a continued pressure to get smaller and mid-sized businesses to migrate to the cloud as quickly as they can, because I think this is obviously going to scare a lot of those businesses. They don't want those kinds of disruptions, and they probably want to have a big partner on the technology side to help them through it.